Hello and welcome to the Pragati Vichar Literature Festival Authors Marathon 2024. This is Rishti, the media representative of Frontlist Media. And today we are here for this session themed storytelling. And the name for the session is Diverse Pens and Multiple Shades of Storytelling. So now I'd like to welcome all the authors who have joined us today. Let me introduce the authors to the audience. Um, Ms. Aashisha Chakraborty, an ardent lover of Rumi, Radiohead, and Rome, Aashisha Chakraborty hails from a world of marshmallow moons, candy clouds, and lemony lakes. Aashisha was chosen as one of the 75 Pan India authors under 30 for the PM Yuva scheme for her historical fiction work with National Book Trust, India. She was the winner of the Times of India Right Season 2 for the Shobha. Her articles have appeared in The Hindu, and she has a Star Wars fan fiction column on silver leaf poetry, an MBA from the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, New Delhi, and a computer engineer from Jamia Millia Islamia. She reads and travels compulsively and blogs on her online diary of sorts, The Mind Bin. Also, I'd like to congratulate you for getting both of your books nominated in the PVLF Author Excellence Awards. And I welcome you to today's session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Aman Singh Maharaj. Considering himself to be a traveler with an avid interest in anthropology, Aman never ceases to be enthralled by the sheer kaleidoscope of cultures, diversity, and architectural marvels that the world has to offer. After graduating with an honors level degree in civil engineering, he continued with an MBA and then a PhD in the field of development studies, whilst working in a multitude of diverse professions, including as an engineer and an economist, before finally choosing to become an entrepreneur. Quite enamored by the concept of magical realism, he later decided to enter the literary realm. He also writes articles on various subjects for national newspapers, focusing mainly on the Indian diaspora, but he has also now forayed into more culturally generic topics. I welcome you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Balaji Vittal. Balaji Vittal is a second generation Calcuttan with his roots to the city dating back to the mid 1950s, which was when Balaji's father migrated to the city, just like many other South Indian boys did. In his early years, Calcutta organically exposed him to music, sports, theatre, debates, and literature. He is the co author of the national award winning book R.D. Burman, The Man, the Music, and the Mami award winning book Gata Rahe Mera Dil, 50 classic Hindi film songs. His most recent book, Pure Evil, The Bad Men of Bollywood, is his first solo authored book. Thank you for joining us today. So let us now start with the session.
Thanks for calling me.
Yeah, sure. So let us now start with the session. My first question for you all is, can you share a brief overview of your journey as a writer and how you entered the world of storytelling? Let's start with the Vittal sir.
Well, my journey into writing started quite late in my life. I was about 38 or 39 when I started freelancing for the Hindu, the Metro Plus. And because my friends in my group email and all, and that day we had that, those days we didn't have Facebook. So they said, yeah, you have a flair for writing. And even my school teacher had told me once, English teacher had told me once that I have the flair for writing, but I never listened to her. I should have. Anyway, so then at the age of 38 or 39, whenever I started sort of freelancing for the Hindu Metro Plus, then of course I started enjoying it and they also liked what I was writing. And then one day, a year later, it was a chance conversation with my college senior from Jadavpur University, Anuruddh Bhattacharjee. He said, I'm planning to write a book on R.D. Burman. I said, great, I'll join you as well. So that's how it started. Started quite late when I was quite far entrenched into my corporate life. But then, yeah, it's one of those uh, twists and turns in lives that I consider very fortunate that has happened to me. That's how it started.
Really interesting. How about you, Ashisha?
So I kind of have been straddling two careers, as I call it, because I started doing my engineering, of course, my BTech from Jamia Millia Islamia, and there my journey started being a blogger. So when my blog was nominated for the Indian Blogger Awards, I decided that I should probably graduate to some short stories. That's when I went for an MBA and we got into some spoken word poetry in and around Delhi as part of the Poets Collective and the Delhi Poetry Festival. Then Write India had just started the second season by the Times of India. It was a crowdsourced writing contest for people to send in their short stories. And there, my my short story was, occupied the first place in a prompt by Shobha Day and in like among the top 10 by Manu Joseph and Twinkle Khanna. So I guess that's when the whole thing started. Post that, I published a couple more short stories here and there in anthologies. My debut novel called Misadventures of a Sales Girl, this one, it got published in 2022 by Rupa. And since then, I think I've kind of, as I said, I've been doing two careers at once. So this one is my second novel, which is the book of historical fiction, The 13-Year-Old Queen and Her Inherited Destiny. It's a part of the fellowship by PM Yuva as to, write about the unsung freedom fighters of the Indian movement. So that's where I am today. And that's how life has been moving for me.
That's wonderful. How about you, Aman sir?
Sure. I think, like all writers or many writers, I would call myself an accidental writer. Whilst I've always thought there's been a book within me, and like Balaji, sir, there's always been praise from the time I was in school, where teachers said, you know what, you have a writing flair, keep at it. But I may be a South African Indian of third generation, but we still have that whole Indian thought behind us about having some sort of job or career that's actually going to generate a revenue for us in a surefire way. And I became an engineer. And it's only much later in life, like Balaji, around 36 or so, that I said, okay, you know what? No, 34, sorry. I have a flair for writing. I've got some time. I've got a career as an engineer and an economist. Let me just give this a shot. And the time became available, which allowed me I would say, the indulgence of writing. But it is not something that I do as a means of supporting myself. I do it out of a passion and a love for writing and reading, which unfortunately, the arts in South Africa compared to India, there's a huge demand for the arts, and you can make a living of the arts still in India because there's a demand for it. But in South Africa, you have to follow the more mainstream kind of careers. So for me, it's something that I do as a part-time endeavor to sort of stimulate my mind constantly.
Okay, that's really interesting. Moving on to the next question. Are there any specific authors or literary movements that have influenced your storytelling style? And how do these influences manifest in your work? Let's start with Aashisha, ma'am.
So I think every writer is mostly at first an avid reader. And that's how, we cultivate a love for books, and that's how we enjoy the written word and enjoy the act of writing as well. So my influences have been quite wide ranging, to be very honest. So right from Virginia Woolf, Jane Austen and Margaret Atwood with their feminist narratives. I enjoy magical realism as well with Justine Garda, Salman Rushdie, and other writers of that ilk. Uh, I'm quite enamored by the literary, movement, the beat movement, where you have a lot of writings by Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. So someday probably I would like to, write in those genres. But currently my writing is influenced by a lot of contemporary fiction, a lot of contemporary and feminist narratives. So yeah, my major influences are Margaret Atwood and Jane Austen. Yes.
I absolutely love Jane Austen's works. Um, how about you, Aman sir? What has been your influences, Penny?
So I can't tell you directly, is this author that I have imitated, or maybe I tried to use his or her method of writing. But what I've been told, and what maybe it's because this is the kind of genre I love. I'm more into classical type literature. When I say classical type literature, I'm talking of the likes of Thomas Hardy and Charles Dickens, where they go into the nuts and bolts of the person's character. And obviously, Thomas Hardy and Charles Dickens wrote from a very male centric point of view, and my writing is a very male centric point of view as well. Um, so I've been told that the way I developed the main protagonist or the protagonist in my novel gave people a very similar feeling of getting into the very nexus of the soul or of the character of the archetype in my novel. In terms of modern influences, I've been told that they're picking up bits of Gregory David Roberts, who wrote Shantaram. And I must admit, if Gregory did affect my writing in a positive way, it was done through osmosis. Maybe there were bits of Bombay that reminded them of Shantaram, which was the book written by him. And yes, I love his style of writing. I've read his book, Shantaram, and its sequel, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And if you understand, when he wrote Shantaram, it was written in first person. So the entire novel, it's about, I think, 800 pages. Every sentence, every paragraph has the protagonist in it. So for someone to keep you enraptured with just one character being developed mainly, then it must be fantastic writing. So if mine has a hint of it, I take it as a compliment.
Amazing. How about Vidal, sir?
Well, right from the Enid Blyton days and Hardy Boys and Alfred Hitchcock, the three investigators, right from a very young age, the sense of, always you're trying to conjure up pictures when you read those words. You sort of imagine what those children will be, what adventure the children would be engaged in. So, somewhere in the embedded memory, it came that look, when there are no pictures, is when you have to create pictures through your words. For an author to be as engaging as an Alfred Hitchcock was, and an Enid Blyton, or the Hardy Boys writer was, one had to engage, convert words written in the text into pictures in the reader's mind. That was my first influence. Second is, I love the way Arthur Haley went into details, be it hotel, be it hospital, be it the wheels in the Detroit, in the automobile industry in Detroit. He was a researcher. He could have written a thesis about each, if not a fiction. So it showed the importance, and it stood out in stark contrast to the Hindi films I used to watch those days, where they used to skim over the top. Whereas this guy was getting into all the details. So these were my influences. Another influence was Frederick Forsyth, because often you'd see, in books like Fourth Protocol, the book has ended, and hey, the suspense hasn't been revealed yet. So what is the truth? It came out in the epilogue. So that is something that sort of unconsciously influenced me, saying that hang on to it, drag them till the last page and then give it to them. So these were some of my influences. I mean, I'm not saying I directly was influenced, but somewhere looking back, I said, yeah, I must have been influenced by these people.
Amazing. So my next question to you all would be, how has your cultural background or experiences influenced your storytelling and the themes you choose to explore in your work? Let's start with Aman sir.
So I think the I've become what I would term a racist reader. In as much as they are fantastic writers throughout the world and the globe, as I've become older, I've gravitated towards reading books either by the Indian authors or it's stories set in India itself. So I think because of that, part of what drives that is the fact that there's such lyricism in the way we write. And maybe that comes from our vernacular and the way we speak, our language. Our languages are very rich, especially in terms of the descriptive aspect of life. Especially if you look at love, there are so many different words to explain the word love, even if it's just romantic love in Hindi. Not that I speak Hindi fluently. I speak it almost in a pidgin fashion. But this kind of seeps into our writing, I believe. So this is where I have moved and gravitated towards in my own writing, that you find a lot of lyricism in the way I've written. There's a lot of rich metaphors, there's a lot of rich imagery that is used. And I find this is very, very prevalent in the writings of Indian authors. And where it comes from, like I've said, I think it comes from the vernacular being so rich itself. And that same vernacular is translated into English in our minds, and it comes out in our words.
I absolutely agree with you on that rich vernacular aspect because we also have like so many cultural backgrounds, being the Mughal Empire or the British Empire and everything influenced our writing and culture. So it definitely shows in the writing. So the same question to Ashisha ma'am.
So born and brought up in Delhi, but traveled to almost 30 plus countries. I've always been influenced by an eclectic, group of writers, authors, and things which happen. I'm more of someone who tells a fun story or who narrates something which will make people worry, which will make people excited. So I usually take my influences from things that happen around me. So the short story that won Right India was about an LGBTQ protagonist, and it is something which I've seen a lot around me, people who've come out of the closet at a very very later stage, and was inspired by a schoolmate. My first book, Misadventures of a Sales Girl, is of course partly inspired by my own sales experiences, because I work as a sales and marketing manager in a telecom firm. And that's where I got the idea, because I felt this was a story that people needed to know, about the plight, about all the things which people don't know when they get into this thing. Once they're fresh out of MBA, everyone is like, yes, we're going to get a high profile job, a fun thing which we'll do, we'll make strategies, we'll make cool stuff. And then suddenly someone is sent into the market, and you do all the groundwork, um, all the basic things which no one tells you about. So I wanted Misadventures to be a fun story handbook for people, for new jobbers, for aspirants to enter this market and to understand what they are getting into, and also to know what they have to get out of it. How do they make the best of it? So it is about an Chatterjee's internship and how she aces it, how she learns the nuances. While also, so this protagonist is actually based in Delhi, but she's sent to Chennai, so she also deals with the whole language thing, the language problem. Not problem, I mean the whole South-North connect. So that's something which I had explored. My second book is historical fiction, so that was a part of the fellowship. So it was not exactly a cultural or a contemporary influence, but that did come out because of the 75 years of India's independence. And I did feel that if we want to write about women who were feminists before the whole idea of feminism came into the picture, and also from an idea and from a place which has not been explored so far, that's the Northeast. So this is about a Naga woman freedom fighter called Rani Gaidinliu, and I thought that I want to tell her story because it was such a fascinating story with so many unbelievable elements. So that's where my books have come from. I do intend to write more on, of course, real life experiences, and also from a historical perspective someday, because I'm kind of moving a little towards that.
Amazing. I actually went through your book, Miss Adventures of a CS Girls, and it is actually really helpful for students because they actually, like you said, they go into MBA and think they'll straight become a band manager and do all the cool stuff, but they'll actually get to be a area CS manager, like you said. So yeah, that is a really great perspective for students. How about you, Vital sir?
Well, mine is very different. I don't write novels, I don't write fiction. I write only Bollywood. So it's a very small piece in a very different world. And I can't be the protagonist myself, unlike in Ashisha's story, where it was like her own story. Here, an R.D. Varman story cannot be my story, obviously not. And I hope the characters in Pure Evil, which is all about the villains of Bollywood. I hope none of them is me. I hope none of them reflect what I am. Hopefully not. So I had to completely remove myself from the context and yet be engaged enough to be able to talk about it authentically, because it's purely a commentary. It's a narrative I'm doing. It's a narrative non-fiction. Okay, even the Adi Baran book was not an authorized biography. It was an analytical work. It was a storybook, right? And you're writing about someone else. So it has my story, the subject, the culture has to be the culture of the person I'm talking about, right? And I have to switch cultures, because second book was Gata Rahe Mera Dil, which is about 50 landmark Hindi film songs across 6 decades. There is no one culture. It was about different composers, different lyricists, different heroes, different filmmakers, different genres of music, from Qawwali to romantic to everything else, Western, cabaret, everything. So there is no one culture. I have to keep switching cultures. I have to become part of that culture and not let that culture influence me. I am different and the subject is different, and yet I have to see it close enough. I have to be engaged enough to be able to write about it. So my case is very different. So I need to sort of cast myself in the mold of what the narrative has to be. I don't know whether I managed to respond to your question, but that's what it is.
So, I totally got it. The next question to you all is, what challenges have you faced in portraying diverse characters or settings in your works, and how did you overcome them? Let's start with Vittal, sir.
I don't know if this question will be applicable for me because, again, that's more of a fiction book related questions.
Okay,
Because
so
I have to talk about characters as they are, as I have interviewed them, right? Or the characters in Pure Evil as I see them and as they stood in, because the story has been told. It's a story that Salim Javed have told, right? It's not my story. I'm only interpreting the story what others have said. I'm just an interpreter of a story that has already been told. So I don't create characters. So I don't know whether this question applied for me. Let's maybe hear Aman and Ashisha on this, and then I don't know how. So
okay, so would you just like to talk about Bollywood villains for a bit?
yeah, it's a rogues gallery of all the various forms of villainy. It is not a biography of all the villain actors. Neither is it a Wikipedia synopsis of all the villain films that we have seen. It is a storybook. It is like the big black box of villainy unpacked. You take out the characters and arrange them in logical segments of, villains of the nation, villains of the society, villains of the individual, and then there are various categories of villains, right? And then you arrange them decade wise. So it's like walking into a rogues gallery. You walk into a museum, you see various characters, and there are various sections, right? There are smugglers, there are rapists, there are the mafia, there is those psychotics, there are those psychopath killers, there are those wife snatchers, there are those uh, uh, backstabbing friends, or cheating employees, dishonest employees, right? Or there are those foreign enemies, like foreigner enemies, like British has been cast as a villain in many many films, and then post 1962 came the film called Hakikat, where it showed Chinese as a villain, Pakistan as a villain, and then even that kept changing hues, because from war we went to insurgency, and ISIS became the villain, and all ISI became the villain. So to unpack this big black box of villainy and take out all the characters and arrange them in logical boxes up there on the showcase, that's what this book is about. And I've also tried to showcase how the changing face of villainy ran alongside our socio-political history, because things happen for a reason, and things that happen out there is what get mirrored in our films. That's what the book is about.
That's a very interesting concept for a book, really. Um, let's start with now answer.
Yeah. So just to get the question clear, it's about. Can you repeat the question to me, Drishti,
Yes,
again,
yes,
please?
sure. What challenges have you faced in portraying diverse characters or settings in your works, and how did you overcome them, the challenges?
Okay. Looking at the settings, my book is set about 25% in South Africa and 75% in India. some people have said, although it's a work of fiction, there's also travel log elements to it because the main character goes to various cities in India and he has certain experiences in each city. Um, I, I wouldn't say I had a challenge because all these cities and towns and villages I've been to before, because I've been to India about 18 times. I've been going to India from the age of 7, and just 2023 alone, I went three times to India. So a lot of the setting comes from what I saw or perceived around me. And obviously, you hype it up to make it more readable or more commercial for the reader to appreciate. So that was not a challenge for me. The challenge lay in developing the character. When I first wrote about this character called Milan, he was like a Bollywood lollipop hero. He was syrupy sweet, very handsome, very charming, and really a lovely person who you would expect to see in a Bollywood movie or the old genre. And then I said, no, this doesn't work for me. So that's the editing part was where I developed the character, and it happened over 16 years. And with each edit, I made him more and more realistic, if not more and more misogynistic. So much so to the point that I had a lot of feminists who contacted me, very upset about the novel, and it was a fear of mine to release the novel with such a high level of misogyny, because when I finally completed the editing, it was in the midst of the whole Me Too movement, which was very much needed. But what the Me Too movement also did was it killed a lot of male-centric writing, like Philip Roth and someone like Kushwan Singh, who wrote very male-orientated books. I can't see any modern person writing a Kushwan Singh book like In the Company of Women, because it just doesn't gel with the whole Me Too movement. So I had to wait for the Me Too movement to dwindle a little bit before I developed the courage to say, you know what, I'm ready to release this. And yes, I'm going to get a bit of flack for developing a character that has so many flaws that might be seen as chauvinistic. But as you read through the book, you'll realize that the character I developed, he has other aspects as well. He's humorous, he's highly intellectual, but he's not educated. But at the same time, there's this whole spiritual dimension that starts to emerge in the character, in the protagonist, which I kept hidden in the beginning. So I almost put layers of different red herrings to lead the reader astray in terms of judging the character. So I hope that was effectively done. I mean, I've been told it has been effectively done. A lot of people who hated the character in the beginning started to evolve with the character and found that they fully understood why he was what he was as they got deeper into the story. So yes, I think the development of the character was more challenging, but with edits, it somehow feeds into itself.
Interesting. Aashisha ma'am, what about you?
So I think developing diverse characters can be uh, quite an exercise in itself, because you have to sit in the shoes of the person and live that life. So for my first book, it was quite easy for me. And usually debut novels are written by people based on their experiences, because for a writer who's just starting off, it's easier to narrate a story which you've already experienced. So I believe the protagonist of Misadventures of a Sales Girl has a lot of commonalities with me, myself, and a lot of other people I've seen around me. So that was easy for me to develop. But the other characters, say the mother or the second, protagonist, or even the sales head, all of them were very different characters with a definite bent of mind. So, for instance, it's important to show all the sides in a particular novel. So even if the sales head was, seen as the dragon, that's the name given to the sales head by his employees. But I had to ensure that people knew why he was the way he was, what made him so. Because Every character has a backstory. Every person has a reason to be the way they are. And that's why even the dragon had a backstory. And to develop that, to think of that was a challenge, a little bit of a challenge in itself. But the major challenge in developing a setting and character came to me with my second book, which was the 13-year-old queen, because as I think Mr. Vittal also mentioned, that if you have to stay away from the character, you have to stay away from yourself, and you have to get into the other person's shoes. So I could not imagine what a 13-year-old Naga woman would be feeling because I had no idea what cultures they have. I had no idea if their pastimes were, I don't know, having fun with animals. And, I saw that I read about her being very, very pally with tigers and mithuns and gayals. So it seemed that they had a very strong connect with nature. But to develop that into a narrative and to bring it on at a level where the reader would also start understanding and empathizing and enjoying, then there were some instances, there were some stories, and there were some scenes in the book where there were accusations of sacrifice, human sacrifice. And in historical fiction, it is important to stay, of course, close to the truth. You cannot change the fact that India, became free in 1947. So the plot essentially is fixed because the things have already happened. So the whole prowess is involved in making the writing more readable, making the events more alive for the reader, and making the character more empathetic or more accessible to the reader. And that's where the challenge came in, because I did not know who Gaiden Liu as a person was, and there's no written account of that. So even if you go in the National Archives, you will only find that, yeah, she was born then, and this is when she did this and this, but nothing is fixed because most of it is oral folklore. Most of it is things which are bandied about, talked about. You don't have any written accounts. So yes, that part was challenging. So I tried to make it as contemporary as possible without, removing the whole 1900s feels. Um, so I think that was quite challenging for me. Even the setting, the difference between, the whole clash between the Cookies and the Nagas, the hills and the plains people, and the understanding of what it means to be a woman freedom fighter who decides that she will fight for the nation, she will fight for the country, and she does not really care about getting married. So those values and those things that she is breaking as she goes. So I think that was quite an interesting journey for me, the research.
Yeah, even listening to it is very interesting. So my next question is for Mr. Aman Singh. With settings in South Africa and India, how do you weave cultural connections into the narrative, and what role do these diverse locations play in the story?
Well, just to give you a little bit of background, the city I stay in has 1 million Indians. And for many, many, I think, decades, it was the largest concentration of Indians outside of India itself, which is in the city of Durban. It was only in the last 10 or 15 years that US cities like New York and then London and Dubai, started to exceed South Africa cities, well, especially Durban, in terms of the number of Indians. So that cultural connect is there. We came here probably 6 generations ago. We started in 1860, and we're still very much Indian in what we eat, how we eat. We eat with our hands. Even when I'm speaking, even though I don't speak with the typical Indian accent, I still have and sort of an Indian touch to my accent itself, if I may use that word, without being sounding totally Indian as from India. Um, in terms of we celebrate the festivals. We whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or even a Christian, they are celebrating in the way that some of the Christian people in India celebrate the festivals as well. So we didn't need to look for the cultural connect. It was inherent because it was brought by our forefathers. Yes, it is diminishing. I think I keep my traditions a lot more than my contemporaries, but that's because I have such a love and sort of flair for anything Indian. Um, So you can't use me as a benchmark of the typical Indian in South Africa. But having said that, I think I don't think Bollywood represents culture as such that, as the traditional culture of parampara as we understand it. But it gives you access to India for a lot of people who want to be excited, visually to see something. So if they see the stars wearing, a sari or whatever, chanya choli or whatever it is at weddings and typically Bollywood movies have a wedding theme about it, especially the commercial ones. So automatically it starts injecting this idea of what culture and tradition is into contemporary or modern Indians in South Africa. So it's probably through a system of osmosis that the intent is not to impart culture to people in the diaspora, but that's what it does. It's done through, the platforms like Bollywood and so forth, which have played a huge role in influencing the mindsets of Indians in South Africa.
I was just about to ask you that question, that whether Bollywood has had a lot of influence in your idea of Indianness.
Well, I mean, every Indian boy who was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s, who's our hero? Every Indian boy needed an Indian hero, and it's still Amitabh Bachchan. No one can replace him, so it is what it is.
So you also had a close connection to the Bollywood villains also.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, I've read Balaji and I have met briefly. We met in Bhubaneswar.
Bhubaneswar, yeah,
So, yeah,
that's right.
I've got his book. Yeah, I've read his book and I loved it. I have a huge love for, well, I hate saying Bollywood. Maybe I should say the Indian film industry.
Okay, amazing. So my next question is for Balaji, sir. My question is, Pure Evil, the bad men of Bollywood, explores iconic villains in Hindi cinema. What drew you to the dark side of Bollywood storytelling, and how did you approach analyzing the misdeeds of these characters?
Yeah, the key was in terms of being clear in my mind about what their villainy is about. I need to be very clear as a storyteller. Okay. For example, when I'm talking about the Bombay Stock Exchange blast, which happened in March 1993, I tried to put that incident under the mafia section of the book. Till Hussain Zaidi, he's the best, the crime fiction writer and crime reporter. He said, Balaji, you're making a mistake. It was not a deed of the mafia. He said he had spoken to Daud Ibrahim, and Daud Ibrahim vehemently denied having any hand in that. He's saying, my family lives in Bombay. Why would I blow up? And mafia doesn't work like that. Hussain Zaidi told me, mafia don't blow up buildings. They just run an underground economy. They do things quietly. They run things parallelly. They have police and politicians and bureaucrats on their payroll, right? They don't create those loud bangs. It is a job. You have to put it in the foreigner villain, because it was a job. It was unmistakably the job of Pakistan had a hand in it. So I brought the villainy under the foreigner villain section. Are you getting me? So again, the so things like that, and then things like in terms of how do you, when I'm talking about an anti-hero, how do I differentiate between Vijay of Diwar and Vijay of Trishul, vis-a-vis what Shah Rukh Khan did in Bazigar, right? One might say in both the cases, even in Diwar or Yadav Ki Barat, here was an angry young man trying to avenge his parents' death or the humiliation or whatever. But in those movies, if you Dharmendra and Amitabh Bachchan, they never allowed any collateral damage. They never allowed any innocents to get hurt in the whole thing, right? They had that moral streak intact. But in Bazigar, he actually killed three people who had nothing to do with the actual villain. He had gone mad. He had lost his psychotic. So that comes under a psychotic chapter and not under anti-hero. The key lies in deeply understanding what each villainy was about and getting the categorization absolutely correct. So I had to watch over 300 films, and many of them multiple times. Okay, and then read up a whole lot of archival material, and then I had to go and interview about 50 plus actors. Over 50 actors, I had to interview them. So once I get clarity on what the nature of the villainy was about, is when the story would come out clearly. Otherwise, it will be a very garbled narrative where, if in my mind I'm not clear, even the reader will start getting confused between one form of villainy and the other. I had to prevent that from happening. So that was the key in terms of writing. The rest follows. Right. Once I'm clear about these airtight compartments, then you describe the villainy and you do the social connect. For example, I start a chapter saying that Keshav Mahindra said in Economic Times, or what I was saying, after the British Raj came the license Raj. Because that statement was the start point of when I'm talking about the smugglers. Because there was so much of, it took so much of duties and all to bring to import an item, the smugglers used the black channel to bring goods inside the country. So you lay a socio-political, a socio-economic premise for what each form of villainy is about. So in the last 20 years, if you find Pakistan as a villain, you won't find any war-based movies. You'll find insurgencies, because that has been the nature of our enmity with Pakistan.
Very interesting. My personal question this is, you said that you have to do a lot of research, like watch so many Bollywood movies, interview so many people. Of course, it would be really interesting. But was there some point or like some particular thing that was a little tiresome, or you did not enjoy researching that particular thing? Was there something like that, or was there not?
Well, research is always painful. It's never easy, because I had to go and look for books and look for people and look for information and look for information and look for information, and sometimes there are conflicting narratives. Right? It's never easy, and such a book had never been written. It's a pioneering effort, if I may very humbly say so. ये मैं नहीं कह रहा हूँ, others are saying it. Such a book has never been written, so I never had any reference point. When you write a biography, there is a finite start and end point of a biography, right? With some penumbras about his, R.D. Burman's father, talk about R.D. Burman's father, S.D. Burman, and then the legacy and all that. Here I had nothing to fall back upon. It was my own story I had to create on my own. So that was a big challenge. Frustration was in terms of sometimes saying that I'm not getting the right material, I'm not able to, sort of. And also, thing is, I'm writing about all the bad people, and somewhere I had to be careful with myself in terms of not trying to justify them. Right? Somewhere I didn't want to get into the Stockholm syndrome of trying to justify their deeds. That's why I always kept telling myself, Balaji, pull out, pull out, pull out. You're not them. You don't belong to that world. You're just writing about them. Right? And that's why I added a last chapter at the end saying crime and punishment, because ultimately all these villains, the karma caught up with them, except for a few people who managed to get away by the law, who managed to get away from the law. But ultimately the karma. So that last chapter was a bit of cleansing for me, saying that I've just written about you guys, but I don't for a minute endorse what you guys did. Right? I don't support what you did. And if you have escaped the law, your karma will catch up with you. So these were the challenges, because when you do bad things, the bad things get into you. And I've been living and sleeping with these characters for 8 years. It took me about 8 years to write this book. So obviously that did have a sort of a little bit of a negative impact on me, but I managed to cleanse myself out of that and pull myself out of that at the end of it.
Amazing. So my next question is for Ashisha ma'am. Your book, Miss Adventures of a Sales Girl, explores a young woman's journey in a male dominated sales environment. What inspired you to delve into this particular theme, and how does it reflect broader societal issues?
I think I kind of started only with this particular topic. So this was, as I said, I wanted to just talk about what a person who's fresh out of college, um, expects out of a company which hires them. They expect a lot of things, and then things don't go as per your expectations. It's a very common, you know, discrepancy between your bookish knowledge and your practical knowledge. And I think this is something which I felt no book was actually talking about. You find a lot of books, nonfiction, good nonfiction, very popular nonfiction, talking about this is what you should do, to excel at work. This is what you should do to reach the biggest echelons. But you reach there after a certain amount of grunt work and groundwork, and no one talks about that. So I wanted to kind of make it fun and entertaining, to talk about the things which actually happen before reaching the top. You have to first climb those stairs. And I think those are the first levels which people need to know once they are fresh out of college. So that is where the whole inspiration and the base of the book is built. As for sales being a male dominated society, I mean, a profession, I'm not sure about uh, every country, but statistics say that about less than 10% of women are still part of the boardrooms. And in sales, I think less than 20% of women globally are still involved in sales. That could be a part of, I mean, that could be a choice as well. I mean, many women might not want to do that kind of grunt work, because as you see in the beginning of the chapters, in the first few chapters, Inakshi's mother tells her that no, you should not go into this. Go into something which is software, which is finance, which is a little more comfortable, where you will be inside the office. Why do you want to do sales? So this is what people also have a certain notion or an idea that, this is not suitable. And women themselves tell themselves that no, why should we venture into something like that? So that is one perspective. And the second perspective is when you actually go there, when Inakshi actually ventures into, her the Chennai region, and she finds that there are no women in sales at all. So that makes it difficult for her to kind of break the ice, not just because of the language barrier, but also to understand how to, you know, get that rapport, to understand, because sales is all about relationships. Sales is all about getting things done, a lot of execution, a lot of rigor, a lot of excellence. And for that, you need a certain sort of camaraderie, you need a certain sort of support. That's where the book was born. That's where the whole base was created. And I initially thought that it would be a serious thing, but then I was like, no, I think it needs to be more fun, because eventually Ina over time realizes that she can manage and she can do it, and all she needs is the right push. She needs to know where to, put her efforts in, where to find the right kind of people, the right kind of efforts. So if I talk about the larger societal implications, I would say that there's still a lot of scope uh, for people to accept uh, a genderless society, I would say. Instead of saying a feminist society, I would say a genderless society where people do not expect uh, say a man to do the things that a man does, and maybe a woman to do the things that a woman has been doing for so long. Today we have every gender, and even people who don't identify with any gender, opting or choosing things as per their interests, and not because historically it's been happening or being handed down to them. So the idea of my book is that you choose your profession in society, you choose your roles in society without any preconceived ideas coming from any tradition or any value system. So that is the basic idea, and that is what I wanted to say. Apart from, obviously, the infrastructural issues that always happen in sales, and it's true for all men and women. I know my friends used to work in sales, and they're like, no, there are no washrooms at distributors points. You're supposed to manage yourself. I'm like, I don't know how that works. And there are chapters in the book where Ina finds out how to manage and actually has to manage. So those are things, because sales is it's a revenue center of a company. And if there you do not make it easier for them, or you do not facilitate that particular company or that department, then it becomes difficult for them to perform. So focusing on those aspects as well, making it easier for people to perform and to become better, I think all those things are mishmashed into this novel. That's what I tried to do. um, Also, I think there's a lot of overhaul needed in terms of the work culture that exists currently in the country. In some of the some of the companies in the country. I can only talk about a couple where I've worked, and a couple where I've heard of, or where I've read the statistics and reviews on Glassdoor, and done some of my secondary research from. Is that a lot of culture overhaul remains to be done, where people have to be more supportive, have to be more uh, cohesive in working together to get the results. So I think those have been the main themes of my first book. And I think the rest remains to be said. Of course, there are a lot of elements of drama and romance as well, but the major elements are these.
Wonderful. So that were all the questions we had for today. So next we tell our authors to introduce their books and tell the readers why it would be a great read for them and what they can expect from the book. So let's start with Aman sir. Could you just quickly introduce the book to the readers?
Sure. So my novel, it's called A Dalliance with Destiny. It spans a century, starting in 1906, 1910, sorry, and goes up to 2010. And it's about a character, a 30-year-old man facing a whole number of challenges in South Africa, where everyone is celebrated the euphoric entry of South Africa into this rainbow nation, into this post or this democratic nation post apartheid. But he's not feeling welcome. He's feeling confused. He's feeling dislocated. And as the cliche is, when you're feeling confused and dislocated, where do you go? You run away to India and you try and find yourself. And that's what he does. He gets these nudges to go to India, and he goes to India to looking for certain experiences, and the experiences don't turn out to be what he expected them to be. And he's looking for love, he's looking for sex, he's looking for a guru, and he travels from city to city, from village to village, traveling up the Ganges, looking for his ancestral villages, and hopefully to make some sort of kinship by blood in India, so that he can uh, tie up that strand that was opened over a century ago when his forefathers left India to come to South Africa. And along the way, he has this spiritual kind of experiences. And then he has a lot of sexual experiences where in Calcutta, he shacks up with the Anglo Indian girl for a couple of weeks. And that's a very real sort of modern tale of what relationships are all about. And then in Delhi, he has a totally different kind of romance, which is a very ethereal kind of love. And I put it in there to contrast the both. But ultimately, the book is about spirituality. It is about finding yourself within this gamut called life and finding out what your role and responsibility within it is. So it's not a for everyone book. It's I would say my book suffers from a multiple personality disorder. It has lots of humor in it, but at the same time, it's a very sad, soul-stirring book, and that's why I say there was a lot of deception in the way I wrote. Because initially, a lot of people were very unhappy, especially feminists, that I wrote about such a misogynistic character. But as they go deeper into it, as it unravels, they get to understand why he is the way he is. So it's written in the type of classical type of literature. So if you enjoy literature that goes into the depth of analyzing a particular person within the sort of rubric of a novel, then this is something you should explore.
I'm sure our audience will love your book. Next, Balaji Vittal sir, can you please introduce your books to the readers?
Pure Evil, The Bad Men of Bollywood, published by HarperCollins, is my first solo authored book. The previous three books were co-authored with Anirudh Bhattacharjee. Pure Evil, The Bad Men of Bollywood is about the changing face of Bollywood villainy, starting right from 1929 till about 2021. So it covers about 90 years of Bollywood cinema and the changing face of villainy, the various categories, the various types, the various shapes, size, characters, and why they existed, when they existed. What was the socio-economic or the socio-political background that gave rise to this screen villainy? Obviously, it had to be something which is happening in the society because cinema mirrors what happens in the society. So it sort of runs alongside our socio-political, socio-economic history. And it is like demystifying this big black box called villainy and all the various categories. So it's like taking out the characters and looking at them closely. It's a rogues gallery that you walk in there. uh, it involves a lot of research and a lot of analysis and a lot of narrative and lot of people that I had met and archival material. Now, having said that, it is not a gyan book. It is pure Bollywood mainstream masala. There are a whole lot of anecdotes and whole lot of those behind the scenes stories. What happened during this particular shooting and what did that actor do and how did he create his makeup and how did that name come about? How did Kancha China get his name? Okay, in Agnipath. And how did Simi Grewal get convinced to play that role that she did, when she kept, pushing back for 6 months, saying, if I play this role, no one is even going to go invite me to their home again. How she got convinced finally, and how someone else was supposed to play the role of Mogambo, and it ended up with Amrish Puri. And all those sorts of backstories makes, hopefully, and that's what people say, has made it a very fun reading. It's a very interesting read, yet filled with a lot of information. It's a pioneering effort.
It sure sounds very interesting. Now, Ashisha ma'am.
So by this is the book. I think I've already shown it. I'll talk about the cover a little bit because this cover is something that I only gave them the idea to do. This cover has the girl riding pillion, behind the salesperson, and this was my first experience getting into sales. Behind the salesman's bike and traveling all through Chennai, just being pillion, and eventually you'll find it actually also then takes the bike and goes visits Pondicherry all on it. And then you have the iconic temple, the Meenakshi temple, which also features here. So as I've always wanted to have fun with writing, so this is a fun book which also carries some underlying messages, and I've tried to make it entertaining. I've tried to sort of talk about all those unwritten things which people don't tell you, all the things between the lines that keep happening in the corporate media, which we don't know about and which we don't get to know. So perfect for age groups 18 plus and people who've ever worked in corporate, people who would want to work in corporate or sales, or who have maybe just heard of this. And this one is slightly more serious. This is Rani Gaidilu's face from the postage stamp that was released by the government. And it is her portrait that we've used as the cover, the 13-year-old queen. She actually took over the mantle of the movement, the freedom movement, over from her cousin brother, who had started when he got unfairly executed by the British administratives. And that is where the whole story begins and it moves up. So these are my books. The first one is by Rupa Publications. The second one is by the National Book Trust. And I do hope the readers enjoy the read. Yep, that's that.
I'm sure they will love all of your books. So that was all we had for today. It was a great honor to have authors of such caliber here. How you expressed your research process and how your personal experiences, how they incorporate in your books. It was really interesting, and I had a great time personally. And it was truly great to have you all here. Thank you for joining us today.